Introduction. Hi, my name is Theodore, and I want to talk about crochet and fiber arts in relation to social cultural anthropology. Just an FYI, I am using a script, so don't mind me if I'm looking away. For context on my background and possible bias, I have been doing fiber arts since high school and post about it online. I also sell my crocheted work. I am a second-year anthropology student at the University of Waterloo as well. I do also realize you can see the screen that I'm reading off of my glasses. Not taking them off though, so too bad, so sad. What is knitting and crochet? Crochet and knitting are fiber arts. Crochet uses one hook and knitting uses two needles. The Merriam-Webster definition for crochet is needlework consisting of the interlocking of loop stitches formed with a single thread and a hooked needle. And knit is to form by interlacing yarn or thread in a series of connected loops with needles. Most clothing is made of a knit fabric, as it is an easy way to connect fibers and threads. Knitting can be machine made. On the other hand, crochet can only be done by hand, no matter how cheap it is being sold online from fast fashion brands. However, there are ways to machine knit a crochet-like fabric. Gotta look closely to tell the difference. Without going into too much detail, crochet and knitting have been around for a long, long time. They have been used for years as a way for women to push back and take control. Before the advent of machine-made clothing, it was a way for women to provide for families, both making clothing and then also selling them. Selling items was especially prominent in the Great Depression when families were desperate for money. Crochet and knitting more recently have been used as ways to fight back and as political expressions. It has been seen as quiet activism. In modern day, it is still used politically. However, fiber arts are also seen as a bit of an aspiration, with many people not having the time to crochet and knit anymore post-pandemic. Social media's influence. Social media is a bit of a beast. The most important thing to consider when it comes to how social media affects crochet or fiber arts communities is the ability to communicate. This can be seen as an amazing thing in many ways. It allows for people to learn to craft without knowing someone in person, share patterns, gain inspiration, and much more. There is an interesting book by Daniel Miller called Tales from Facebook. While I did not read the whole thing, I did read some snippets that I want to talk about. On page 165, he discusses how many people feel much more comfortable talking online with each other. This was a reference to Facebook. However, I believe it applies to all sorts of social media. Being able to interact without possible insecurities like one's physical appearance, voice, and more allow for people to take the leap in talking to each other. Also, if something does go wrong, you likely will never meet people online, in person, and you can easily just block them online. Social media allows for people to see and interact with like-minded people. I know for myself, while other people I knew in high school crocheted, I was able to truly meet people who liked it as much as I did online. Over the pandemic, crochet started to become more popular. Once some people started posting it, it just spread like wildfire. I had known of its existence before COVID. However, once the Harry Styles cardigan, patchwork cardi, blew up, so many more people started posting. Then the snowball effect came in and suddenly everyone was learning. While it did not stick for everyone, it did create a vast amount of crochet content creators, which greatly grew the online community. A more negative effect, however, is how social media, specifically trends, can have a major impact on what people make. While I will touch on this later, the important thing to consider is how trends behave. People tend to make what they see others make, and more recently items like the Sophie scarf, sailor slippers, and the 5-day star blanket have been made on repeat. I am not immune to these trends either. I have knit the Sophie hood, an offset of the Sophie scarf, and sailor slippers had me attempting felted knitting. However, I can also say I almost never wore my Sophie hood, and my felted project was a failure, which was my fault, but still. The concept of making things just for the trend is not my invention, and I will be covering it more later, so please keep it in the back of your mind. The sweater curse. Gifts. The sweater curse is a very interesting concept and is a very good case study about gifting. Before I start, pardon this being very heteronormative. In short, the sweater curse is a folk tale in the knitting and also crochet community that if a woman knits her boyfriend a sweater, they will break up before it is finished. I knew this story as there is also a chance to break up after it is done, but officially it's before it's done. At first glance, one would think this is a whole load of BS. However, there is some rationalization to it. However, before I explain, I want to tell a very funny story. Back before my grandma and grandpa got married, my grandma knit my grandpa a sweater, and apparently he gave it away to one of his friends. And my grandma did not care. The only reason I knew this is because I was telling my grandma about the curse one day and she told me this story. She did not care that he gave it away, and they had a long and happy marriage. Personally, if my partner, of over 3 years, gave away a sweater I made them, some hands would be thrown. Just saying. Okay, back to the curse. Some versions of the curse state that it has to be the boyfriend who breaks up with the girlfriend. However, there are also stories and versions where either partner breaks up before or after the sweater is complete. When it comes to the boyfriend being the one to break up, the general explanation is that he realizes the girlfriend cares much more about him than he does about her. Seeing that she put so much work into the sweater can make him think, I wouldn't want to put 20 to 30 hours into something for her the way she did for me. On the other hand, the girlfriend might think, while she's making the sweater, that it's a lot of work for someone that she realizes she might not care that much about. Or she might give the sweater and he might not have the reaction she was expecting. For example, if I made my partner a sweater and it took me 30 hours and all they said was, oh cool, thanks, I would be pretty pissed. In many cultures, gift giving can be seen as a very complicated ritual event. While this is not exactly the case for the sweater curse, some of the same mentalities apply. Something we talked about in class was the idea of truly not expecting something from a gift. By its nature, a gift is not a trade. There should be no expected return. However, this is less of the case in practice. The term generalized reciprocity is probably what a gift is meant to be. The term means that there is no expectation for a return gift and no keeping track of what has been gifted and received. However, there tends to be more of an expectation for balanced reciprocity, where there is an expectation for an equivalent exchange. I would argue that in the case of breaking up, negative reciprocity occurs, or uneven exchange. All of this to say, there is a good chance that a gift intended for generalized reciprocity might not actually be achieving that. This could mean the gifter actually wants something back, the receiver thinks the gifter wants something and feels bad, or both occur. And if both people are not on the same page and willing to do what they can to fulfill what the other might want, even subconsciously, conflict will almost always occur. So, will you making a sweater make your partner break up with you because magic? No. However, it might make one or both of you realize some things which could lead to a breakup. Online community, kinship, and the division of labor. Online communities are a really good way to produce and talk about kinship. I have always been interested in how online friendships compare to in-person ones. Back in high school, I did a big psychology project all about the difference between online and in-person friends. This was mainly focused on if online friendships are the same as in-person ones. At this point, I forget what I figured out and don't have easy access to anything on my old school account, so sadly I will not be providing any excerpts. Generally speaking, kinship refers to family, however it can include friendship. Adding on, while not all friendships are considered family, some are. I know growing up my sister and I called one of my mom's friends Auntie, and her kid called my mom Auntie. Something to note, however, at least for me, a lot of the friendships I get online are not exactly strong enough for me to consider them family, at least not yet. However, there are still the kinds of friendships I want to talk about. There are a lot of theories about kinship that sadly I'm going to skip over as they are not super relevant to what I want to talk about today, such as bilateral or unilateral descent. Today I want to focus on the idea of chosen versus forced kinships. Many times familial kinship is not by choice. This does not mean it is unwanted, however it does mean that likely the kinships would not exist if you just met the person identical to your mother on the street. Kinship focuses on blood relationships along with marriages. However, I would argue that some friendships can be closer than marriage. If you talk to a single person, I'm sure many of them will still say they are living a fulfilling and not lonely life. Not always the case, but you know. I am asexual. In immersing myself in that culture, I learned all about ideas of trying not to prioritize romantic over platonic relationships. To think of a hospital example, only family are allowed in some areas. This can include a married partner. However, if someone is unmarried or their friend is just there instead, they are kind of screwed. I had I have heard of friends lying about relationships to stop their best friend from going alone. While that was a bit of a side tangent, what I'm trying to get at is how chosen kin online can be a good source of support. This idea is not exclusive to the crochet community. However, being able to talk to and bond with people online solely for some unique part of yourself can be a nice refresher. While kinship is important, many people, especially in Western societies, can feel disconnected to their biological families. A good example of kinship and community in the fiber arts world is pattern testing. One of the common components of the online fiber arts community is pattern testing. Pattern testing can be quite complicated. Here's a simplified explanation. The pattern creator will normally make a post on social media, mainly Instagram, which a pattern tester will respond to. The post normally contains basic information such as the pattern name, allotted time for the test, what yarn, as well as which hooks and needles are needed, and if other materials are required. Sometimes the post requesting testers will have the pattern testers do extra steps such as tagging other crocheters in the comments, liking, sharing, reposting to stories, and more. These extra steps are starting to become controversial, and many argue that the testers should not have to put so much work in when they are already providing a free service. After testers are selected, they will be sent the pattern and make the item in the allotted time. Pattern testers will give the pattern creator feedback on the pattern and correct any mistakes. They will then normally send the pattern creator high-quality pictures of the finished product as well as post about the item on social media upon release. For compensation, the only thing the pattern creator must provide is the final version of the pattern for free. Very rarely, the pattern creator will give the pattern testers discount codes for yarn, and sometimes they will offer free copies of other patterns the pattern creator has made. However, this is not assumed. Arguably, pattern testing is a very unequal service. The pattern creator tends to receive much more than they give. However, when looking at it with the mentality from before or reciprocal exchange, it is not negative reciprocity, and there is generally no malintent. Instead, it is generalized or balanced. People are not keeping track, and many people do it for the love of the game. I have been a pattern tester many times. While I have not hosted a pattern test yet, I plan to do so at some point. And I know if I did host one, I would be able to find people to test the pattern for me. After hearing what a pattern test is, you might be questioning why someone would choose to do one. In short, there is no one reason for someone to be a pattern tester. First, they might want to make the pattern anyway, so now it's free and they get it early. Second, they might want the social media attention from being reposted on a larger account. They might also just want to crochet, or their friend is hosting a pattern test. There are many reasons to do a pattern test, and the important part is nobody is being forced. Now I gotta do the fun thing. Connect pattern testing back to kinship. Pattern testing allows people to build a network online. Some of the best friendships I have online are from meeting people in pattern testing group chats, or just outright from pattern testing for someone. While I yapped on and on about how social media allows for connection and friendship, it can still be quite isolating. Pattern testing is one of the best ways to actually talk and interact with each other. Adding on, the relationships made from pattern testing can honestly resemble a kinship chart. Pattern testing is the main true form of community. Adding on, the pattern tests I have done where I felt most connected to other creators were tests hosted by smaller accounts. Everyone felt more human and as if we were all working together to make something great. While most of the time the communities created from pattern testing are not extremely long-lasting, they are still a very good way to meet people in the most positive community in the online fiber arts sphere. Effects on slow fashion and world cultures. Social media tends to have a bigger effect on what people make than I want to admit. I already went over some examples before of single items, including when I was influenced as well. However, what I have not mentioned yet is the quantity of what people are making. Videos like everything I made this week or everything I made in March can not exist if you only made one thing in a week or one thing in a month. I want to preface this by saying that this is more of a problem for crochet than knit, mainly due to the fact that knitting is slower than crochet. However, there is pressure to make a copious amount of items for both art forms. I also want to say that I am not immune to this issue. I do not intend to sit here on my high horse and say everyone else is the problem. While I have not made videos following the exact examples mentioned above, I have found myself making things just for the sake of posting about it, and not for actually wanting an item. Saying crochet is a slow fashion in the same sentence as talking about making 20 items in 1 month just is not correct. By all means, crochet is still slower than big brands like Shein. However, this is the definition of slow fashion according to dictionary.com. A movement among clothing producers and consumers that emphasizes eco-friendly, well-made clothing, maintenance and repair of garments to extend their lifespan, and a general reduction of one's consumption of new clothing items. You cannot convince me that making 20 items a month is slow and intentional. It is not a reduction. This dilemma pains me a lot, as I find crochet to be one of the best ways for me to focus. I do not need everything I make, and I am so burnt out of ideas that I find myself making stuff randomly just for the sake of making it. I also sometimes make items for one event. I went to a gala on the weekend. I crocheted a necktie for it. I'm hoping I'm going to wear it again, but who knows? Okay, so how does this relate to anthropology? First, it connects back to social media's influence. There are many people who are hesitant to make bigger items they actually want because they won't have something to post while they make the big item. Social media forces people to feel as though they need to post everything they make, and everything they make must be quick and social media friendly. I love the online crochet community. However, the pressure to make and post daily can be very overwhelming and hard to keep up with. Crochet blowing up online also put on the map for big fast fashion brands. Like I mentioned forever ago, crochet-like knit stitches can be made by machine. However, they are not super common. More likely, if you see something that looks like crochet in stores, it was done by hand and is true crochet. This means that there is someone, somewhere, in a sweatshop, working their butt off making items being paid a few dollars a day right now. And by someone, I mean that plurally. Culturally, this puts a bigger divide between communities who buy fast fashion crochet and those who make it. It forces people into factories and allows their money to have less and less value. This economic change encourages rich Western tourists to go to small communities for cheap, and the cycle continues. As mentioned before, crochet in Western cultures is an aspiration, something people do for fun if they have the time. While for others, people are forced to crochet all day for almost no compensation and work themselves into repetitive stress injuries. Companies like Temu selling a crochet flower for a few bucks affects the regular crocheters. It makes the average person believe crochet is worth very little. This makes sellers trying to sell their work for an appropriate amount be verbally assaulted for their prices. The crochet people see on social media is not what the true community wants. There are so many crafters who do the art form, and many of these people are stuck dealing with different pressures from the online community. It is not abnormal to take 2 months or more to finish one project, and the vicious expectations online only push people to quit the art form altogether. Conclusion. I know I talked about 50 million different ideas in this little video, and I definitely would love to do a deeper dive into some of the ideas on their own. However, the important thing I really wanted to get across is the fact that people in the online fiber arts community have good intentions. Putting aside all the negative things I said, it is truly a welcoming community, even if it's still quite susceptible to online general social media influences. All of my sources are in the description, and I hope everything made sense. If not, feel free to reach out. Thank you!